theory is a branch of mathematics that deals with the time spent by people who wait or queue for a service. In particular, it quantifies the impact of randomness in the flow of arrivals or the time it takes for treatment. If you've ever seen a political cartoon in your local newspaper, you know that what you're looking at is not a photograph. Even so, you know who the cartoon is about because the artist has chosen a few well-chosen lines for the facial characteristics to inform the viewer. That's exactly what a good queuing model does. Although it cannot factor in everything that's going on in the healthcare setting, it can inform the discussion of wait times issues and contribute to the process and policy decisions made by healthcare leaders. So today, I'd like to focus the discussion on three key aspects of queuing: utilization, variability, and pooling. Utilization is the ratio of the rate at which patients enter the system to the rate at which they can be treated. More precisely, it tells you how busy a queue is at any given point in time. If, for example, a healthcare facility has one MRI suite and more patients require a scan than can be served, given the length of the treatment times, a queue will be established and it's going to grow over time passes. But what few people know is that even if the system is able to keep up with the demand, people are still going to find themselves waiting. That's because the arrivals ebb and flow, and furthermore, the amount of time to treat each patient is not always the same. In other words, it's due to variability. There is also a misconception that I'd like to correct about the impact of a surge. Waiting time does not grow linearly with an increase in demand. A 10% increase in patient load is going to lead to more, in fact, sometimes much more than a 10% increase in the average waiting time. So as utilization reaches the 100% mark, the average waiting time quite literally explodes off the charts. To illustrate these ideas, I'd like you to just consider a primary care physician who runs a 4-hour drop-in clinic on a Saturday morning. Let's suppose that the average visit time with the patient is 12 minutes. What that means is that the clinic can treat a maximum of 20 patients. I'm going to ask you to further assume that 19 patients are seen each Saturday, which means that the drop-in clinic is currently running at 95% utilization. If one patient could be seen elsewhere, then the average waiting time would decrease by half with a new occupancy of 90%. If, on the other hand, the doctor was able to rearrange things to reduce the average visit time to 10 minutes from 12, then the utilization would decrease to 80% and the average waiting time would be about 1/4 of its initial value. So what this shows is that even incremental reductions in utilization usually lead to a much larger decline in the average waiting time. The second factor is variability. If everyone arrived like clockwork and all the treatment times were exactly the same, then no one would wait so long as the utilization did not exceed 100%. But real systems aren't like that. There's substantial variability. You can't schedule a heart attack. You don't know in advance the precise time it's going to take to stabilize a patient who comes in, maybe with a seizure or other acute issue. And so to illustrate this, I'd like you to see on the following graph that if all of the variation in the treatment time were eliminated, the average waiting time predicted by the queuing theory model would be cut in half. So the main takeaway from this is if you can reduce the variability in the treatment time, then you're going to see a substantial reduction in the variability. However, you have limited control over how people arrive, and so the only thing you can do is to try to build in the ability to respond to surges in demand. The last factor I want to talk about is the effect of pooling. If two identical separate facilities, think maternity wards, were to be combined or pooled at one hospital, then the speed of the system should increase by a factor of 2. Twice the arrivals, twice the treatment rate. The speed up means that the average waiting time should drop by half. This thinking is correct, and queuing theory shows that the reduction is slightly in excess of a factor of 2. So generally, pooling is a good idea, but there is a hidden risk that comes along with it. The risk is that most healthcare facilities are already very, very heavily loaded, typically running at 90 to 100% utilization. This graph shows that as the utilization gets closer to 100%, the greater the amount of pooling, the quicker that the average waiting time can surge due to a sudden increase in demand. You may not see any delay to speak of at even, say, 95% occupancy, but get a sudden surge and the average waiting time can explode very quickly. So the main takeaways I'd like you to remember are the following. Small reductions in patient load produce bigger reductions in the waiting time. Reductions in the variability of what you can control will reduce the waiting time. The waiting time performance of large pooled systems operating at high occupancy degrades much quicker than smaller separate ones, and surges will happen. One can only work towards as much flexibility as possible to respond to them.